Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing coverage of A Game of Thrones, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the Dragon Skull cave where Arya is hiding by candlelight.
This poor girl, she just, every time she tries to get on with her life, her 9-year-old life, things just fall apart around her. It's tough for her.
You were like 2 feet tall when you were 9, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm just trying to think about when I was 9. I couldn't have handled a single iota of what this girl's got to deal with, so good for her. I'm proud of her.
You're still wearing doll shoes.
It's true. I love reading from Arya. It's so much fun, and this is only our 4th Arya chapter.
I know. This is volume 51 of our coverage of the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, and somehow it's only the 4th Arya chapter. I would say more than any of the other POV characters we've had, she has popped up in other people's chapters. She's
probably the most.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because in the Ned chapters, especially once he's in King's Landing,
right? She's always in there.
She and Sansa are on the periphery, and of course, she's always a presence in a Sansa chapter because there's such seething resentment there.
And she's also in, I think, 1 or 2 Jon chapters back at Winterfell, so she's around a lot.
And this is
very exciting.
This 4th Arya chapter is really where the shit hits the fan. I'm so excited to jump into this. So before that, Maggie, why don't you give us a recap of the chapter, spoilers for everything?
Yes, from here and further on. So Arya is practicing her sword fighting with Syrio Forel, and she seems to be getting pretty good at this, but she still obviously has some lessons to learn. And we get to sort of zoom in on one lesson that she learns from Syrio, and that is the importance of truly seeing. I'll read you a quote. He says, "The heart lies and the head plays tricks with us, but the eyes see true."
This is perfect for you.
It is. I actually didn't even dive into seen and unseen stuff here because I think we're done with that, but
it's almost too on the nose.
Exactly, but I was like, I feel correct in my assertion of how important that was earlier on in the book. But anyway, so they're practicing and it's great. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of red cloaks appear and they show up and they say, "Hey, Arya, your dad wants to see you." And Arya and Syrio both are a little suspicious. They're like, why doesn't he tell us himself? Who are you to tell? Like, I don't trust you. And basically they try to grab Arya by force, but Syrio steps in and Syrio takes on all of these guys. Syrio, who is only armed with a wooden sword and a leather vest. He's no other padding or weaponry. And he takes out like many of these guys in this like amazing, awesome, being all fast and swift and using their swords against them, and it's great. But Arya can tell by the end like he's not going to survive this fight, and he tells her to run, so she runs. And so that's the end of Syrio, R.I.P. I remember for the longest time we had hoped that because we hadn't, HBO Game of Thrones rules, we didn't see him die on screen, so maybe he's still alive, but I think this is it. So he's gone. Arya's running away, doesn't know what to do. And she decides, okay, I can't go up to the Tower of the Hand. That's where they're going to expect me to go. Because she can tell something has gone very wrong, like in the castle. And she's running around and she keeps seeing like Stark men dead. And she's like, oh no.
All of her friends, people she grew up with.
It's looking very bad. She ends up in the stables and her plan is to like get on a horse and just take the King's Road to Winterfell. She's 9. She's going to take the King's Road all the way to Winterfell by herself. She's 9.
If any of our characters could do it.
No, well, exactly. And it's also such a perfect like way to write a 9-year-old character, because you've got that kind of naivete when you're that young, thinking, oh yeah, I can run away from home, I can venture out by myself, like not truly understanding what that would mean.
Sheer willpower.
Exactly. But so she sees her trunk there because Ned's guys had been packing them ready to go on the ship to Winterfell, and she finds a trunk of her stuff and she digs around and Needle is in there, so she pulls that out and she's about to leave, and then a stable boy comes in and he definitely is going to try to kill Arya. So she panics and she remembers one thing, which is what Jon taught her, which is to stick him with the pointy end. And so she does that and stabs this guy like through the stomach, through the back of the neck.
She guts him.
She doesn't stab him. She guts him.
Yeah.
And
she harpoons the stable boy.
He dies and she's like, okay. And then she realizes she can't take a horse because the gates are probably all going to be closed. And she realizes like, they're not going to let anybody out. So I can't take a horse. So what am I going to do? And then she remembers the dark, scary tunnel with all of the monsters, which are the dragon skulls. And she found a way out of the castle through that tunnel last time. So her plan is to go back there. And she can't quite remember how to get there, and she has to be really sneaky and make sure nobody sees her. So she's being very strategic, like trying to find her way around, and she finally ends up in the tunnel, and she's very, very afraid. But then she remembers this time when she went down into the crypts at Winterfell, which are even scarier than this tunnel. And she remembers a moment when down there, Robb was taking her and Sansa and Bran down there, and Rickon too, and kind of freaking them out a little bit. And then John pops out like with flour on his face, sort of pretending to be a ghost. And it scares Sansa as she runs away crying. And it scares everybody else at first too. But like then it becomes this funny joke. And so like that memory keeps Arya from being afraid. And so she continues going through the tunnel.
She stole these 2 candles from the sept.
Oh, yes.
And she's holding a candle like she's Winnie the Pooh with the long pointy head.
Very Dickensian.
Yeah, exactly.
Walking through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she's holding this candle kind of crawling through this tunnel in the dark. It's an amazing place to leave any character, never mind, like you pointed out, a 9-year-old.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like the whole story, not just this POV, but the whole story is in a very different place by the end of this chapter.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I want to start with a nickname that Arya gets that I think is going to inform a lot of this discussion.
Cool.
And it happens right there on the first page, where you get an insight into the dynamic that has been built up between Arya and Syrio Forel, and he sort of tricks her because it reminded me of a lot of things that I'll get to later, but he calls her Dead Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like a distillation of everything we've been talking about, especially the last few weeks, where what we called in the prologue of this book, the central conflict and binary of the story is the living and the dead. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting to graft that, especially the death part, onto a living character. So just keep that dead girl thing in your head as I walk through the rest of this idea.
Okay.
I think Arya is demonstrating kind of the first sign of adaptation that we've seen in any of these Starks, since that's almost all of our POV characters so far.
As in she's like adapting to the things around her?
As in, I will explain it in the next sentence.
Wow, amazing. I'm just setting you up.
there's a line from the end of the chapter with that flashback to Jon covered in flour, and they say, "This is where the dead walk." Talking about the crypt.
Yeah.
And there's sort of an oxymoron there, in the same way the White Walkers are living but also dead.
Yes.
So she's acting like this dead thing. She's crawling through a crypt. She's living and fighting and sweating and breathing and doing all the things that living people do, but she's being called a dead girl. So we kind of have to plumb the depths of these contradictions.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think she's the first one of the Stark kids to learn from their father's failure and tragedy, which is to poorly negotiate the line between living and dead and how to survive that binary. She's adapting to the central conflict look at what she does in this chapter. She takes her first life when she kills the stable boy.
Yep.
So that's her kind of dipping a toe in the death pool. But she also, it's not just the death part. It's definitely the life too.
Okay.
By the end of the chapter. Like, she's kind of playing dead by hiding in the crypt.
Yes. Totally.
But she's also kind of playing alive by impersonating a normal child or a boy in public when she's walking across the square.
Yes.
And all of the gold cloaks are looking down and looking for Arya Stark. And she's performing this new identity as some other life form. In the same way, when she's hiding in the shadows nestled between dragon skulls, she's kind of playing dead. She's trying on both of these, I don't know, are they identities?
Right.
But she's playing in both of these realms. Arya, more than any other character we've seen so far, is transgressing the boundaries between the living and the dead handily. And
that's really cool.
It's only her 4th chapter. And I would say just in these 10 pages, she becomes arguably our most adept survivor.
Yes, I think you're totally right. I have a couple things to sort of, I think, strengthen what you're saying.
Okay, then I've got some more.
Okay, yeah. Well, one thing I noticed, I'll just do one because my other thing's a whole other thing. So I'll just do one. One thing I noticed was that, as like a side note, Jon ends up sort of protecting and saving Arya off page twice in this chapter. And who traverses the land between life and death but Jon Snow, who is resurrected later on. But number one, he when she kills the stable boy, it says that Arya like forgets everything Syrio ever taught her, like the way you do when you're panicked. You forget everything you've ever known. But the one thing she does remember is the lesson Jon taught her, which is stick him with the pointy end. So that's one way he saves her. Number two is when she's down in the dragon pit thing, she is terrified and like can't keep going. But then she remembers that memory of being in the crypt with Jon. And it's like the prank that Jon pulled is what helped her overcome her fear of the crypt. And that helps her overcome the fear of this tunnel with the dragon skulls. So Jon ends up being this like off-page true hero. And he sort of gives her that almost like supernatural strength and ability of going between life and death. I think that's perfect.
And I think this dovetails perfectly into what I was building to, because I think it's a symbiotic relationship between Arya and Jon, because narratively, as we play within the Arya sandbox and start blurring the lines between life and death, that feeds back into Jon's plotline 5 books later, when we start cracking open the door for rebirths and resurrections.
Sure.
I think we're starting some of that. We're building some of the precedent that will make Jon's resurrection sensible within the narrative.
Sure.
In this chapter. I think that's kind of where we plant the flag for what will build to Jon's resurrection.
I like that. And you can even extend it to Arya's later timeline as well, when she becomes a faceless man.
Yes.
Because I think that in a way is also traversing life and death, because you lose your entire sense of self. And like Arya, the person Arya, is dead. And instead she becomes all these other people in order to like enact death upon other people. So I think that works with both of their eventual, fates and things that happen to them later on in their arcs.
Another perfect segue. I'm very happy with that,
very
because I want to zoom out a little bit. Ned is our primary character. He is who the narrative has thus far revolved around.
Yeah.
And that's about to change. The next chapter is Sansa, which is the first time in a long time we haven't had Ned as every other chapter.
Yeah, he's been like every other chapter for, I don't know, 5 or 6 now, it feels like.
Arya's at chapter 4 here. Ned is at chapter 14. So yes, the central narrative revolves around Ned. Mm-hmm. And that's changing. But as we kind of outpace Ned and what he's aware of in the world, I think you could argue that for the purposes of that central Ned Stark-oriented narrative, Arya dies in this chapter.
Oh, okay. What do you mean?
I don't know if he ever finds out that she survives this.
Yeah,
I know
don't know if he does either, actually.
There's a guy she's with when she sees him being executed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he was sent I don't know.
I can't remember, yeah.
I'm sure we'll find out as we get there, but I didn't want to look it up because I don't think that's the point. The point is not to be right, it's to play with ideas.
Sure.
But for the purposes of Ned, she dies in this chapter. And he'll never really know if she survives. Mm-hmm. So she's kind of scattered to the wind of that central narrative. She's kind of cast off from that central narrative that we've been with for, 50 odd weeks now.
Yeah, Arya, as we know her, is no longer here. Yeah.
But she's also kind of irrelevant to that plot now. Mm-hmm. She's not going to sweep in and rescue him from the dungeons. Like, you could have done that with her sneaking through the dungeons with the candle.
Totally.
She could have found Ned
and let him out.
Snuck him out. That could have been it, but that's never going to happen. Mm-mm. So she has moved beyond the scope of our initial narrative. Arya is almost in her afterlife.
Yeah.
She's moved beyond this book almost. So looking at the other characters we've been playing with, are there other people who become narratively undead or unmoored from that central story? Like, look at the context of the last 2 chapters where we talked about Jon and Joffrey almost being coronated by the narrative. Mm-hmm. We talked about when Jon took the oath to join the Night's Watch. We talked about part of the words that he says in front of the heart tree there almost being an oath promising to die.
Yes, right.
I would argue that Arya, as the more adept survivor, her whole plan right now is to more or less die.
I see.
And exist in this afterlife and outpace everyone who's chasing her.
Yeah, I mean, even more so than Jon, because Jon is he's not moving into an afterlife. He's sort of like finally finding his actual life, like where he's supposed to be. Like, this is his new purpose. I think it's not until later on that Jon starts to really be in those other realms and be outside of his own life.
I think you could argue that when he takes the black, which consecrates him being at the wall, he sort of dies for the purpose of the central narrative because he's completely out of view of Ned and the King's Landing drama.
Sure.
Once he is sent to the wall, I guess, and Tyrion drops him off, he's kind of locked in there. But now that he's taken the vows, he's formally out of the scope of the main storyline.
Yeah.
It will change later on, obviously.
Right.
But for right now, he's very much on his own in the same way Dany is. Like, this is Arya moving into Jon and Dany status of, these are the cutaways you get every few episodes. This is not the central story.
I was interpreting it differently. I was thinking of it as like, Arya is away from the story she's supposed to be a part of, and now she's sort of in this afterlife. But that's not really true. She and Jon both have left the central narrative in order to pursue their, or to find their purpose. Jon's is to be at the wall and be this brother of the Night's Watch and eventually be Lord Commander. Arya's is to not be a Lady of Winterfell and instead to become this faceless man and like seek vengeance and all that. So actually, I think, they're kind of both in the same situation right now.
And there's a difference in temperament in how she approaches this, because Jon is, there's just trepidation there.
Sure.
When he's trying to get his bearings and make friends at the wall. And you see Arya kills someone, doesn't care, moves on. At the end of the chapter, she's like, if the dead guy pops out of the wall, I'll kill him again.
I mean, it does affect her at the beginning. It does freak her out. She keeps having like flashbacks to that vision while she's in the tunnel, and she's very afraid of what she's done. But
I
she
think
overcomes
it.
Yeah, she
within
overcomes
9 pages.
Yeah,
like
a 9-year-old.
2 pages after killing someone. There's
Right.
there's a response time there that no one else seems to have.
Yeah, sure. I know what you're saying.
What was the other kind of sidebar you had here?
Well, sure. Yeah, I like that you talked about Arya as being very adaptable, especially compared to Ned. That's what I really focused on here. I was really intrigued by some of the lessons that Syrio was teaching Arya and has taught her, and that she has sort of, taken to heart. And I wanted to kind of unpack that and think about it, especially in the context of Ned and how much he does or doesn't learn. I think the quote we can revolve around is, it's not something that Syrio says in this chapter, but it's a message that he has told her that Arya repeats in her mind to herself in this chapter. And the phrase is, the man who fears losing has already lost. Last chapter, we talked about how this whole book, we've been really preoccupied with when does Ned lose? When's his point of no return? And I think this sort of, it doesn't answer that question of when in the timeline doesn't happen, but it helps us understand how it happens. The man who fears losing has already lost. A couple other things that Syrio says, or that Arya repeats to herself, are, a bruise is a lesson and each lesson makes us better. We talked a lot about this. I think this quote that Littlefinger says early on to Ned that says, you are slow to learn. And even at the end of last chapter, Littlefinger says to Ned, I told you shouldn't have trusted me. Like, we talked over and over about how Ned doesn't really learn from his mistakes, and he doesn't quite pick up on which game he's supposed to be playing and how to survive correctly.
He tells everyone his master plan.
Yes, and here's the biggest one. When Syrio is talking about seeing, he says to Arya, my words lied. My eyes and my arms shouted out the truth, but you were not seeing. And I think that sort of perfectly encapsulates how Ned navigates King's Landing. Is he thinks that he's being smart and is trying to, find out the truth about Jon Arryn and figure out what to do about Cersei and her kids. But also, there are all these signs around him that he's just not recognizing. We talked about that last week. Versus Arya, who does learn all of these lessons. And we see her learn through the course of the chapter. When Syrio kind of does that fake out and he says, she says that he cheated. He says my words lied, but my eyes and my arms shouted out the truth. So then she's able to take that lesson and apply it. And as she goes throughout this chapter, she does things that Ned never learns to do. She is suspicious of who's on her side and who isn't. She sees the gold cloaks and the Kingsguard and says, I don't know whose side these guys are on. I can't trust any of them. She knows not to do what the enemy expects. She doesn't go up to the Tower of the Hand. Instead, she goes somewhere else. She's anticipating. She protects herself and isn't afraid to play a little bit dirty. She guts the stable boy with her sword. Even before a true fight breaks out, all he does is grab her arm and look kind of creepy, and she guts him.
You're saying Ned should have killed the stable boy?
I think so.
That would have helped him survive in the book
I think so. I just mean that
I know what you mean.
Ned would never do anything like that, but Arya is more of a survivor, right?
Sure.
And she's anticipating.
Ned wouldn't need to gut him, though.
No.
If the stable boy tried to block Ned Stark's pass, he could just push past him.
Yes, but
Sure.
you know what I'm saying. And
Yes.
she anticipates, the gates are going to be closed. I'm not going to be able to get through. I don't think Ned would think quite that far ahead. And the other thing is that, as you say, she stays hidden throughout a big chunk of this chapter. She's hiding in the shadows, which is how, as we've said many times, that's how Cersei and the Lannisters win. They do a lot of hiding instead of trying to, be present and seen. They are hiding in the shadows and sort of concealing and hiding their true plans until the right moment.
You do have to play dirty. I feel like there's, we talk about the surprised Pikachu meme. Every time Ned Stark's plans don't work, there's the slow zoom on him being surprised.
Right.
Look at how quickly, because I love this kind of condensed idea of Arya learning much faster. Ned always has this moralistic, completely justified. He's affronted by especially Lannister crimes and total amorality. Look at Arya's story in 4 chapters. If you compare how horrified she was when Micah, the stable boy,
Yes.
was killed by the Hound.
Right.
And then two chapters later, in her POV, she's killing her own stable boy for her own ends to survive.
Crazy. Yeah. Right. It's massive. It's a massive transition for her, massive arc. And none of it is unbelievable. None of it feels too rushed. You believe everything that's happening. It's really well crafted.
It's adaptation.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's all cemented sort of at the end when Arya is remembering that crypt moment, because who else has been thinking about the Winterfell crypt? Ned. He keeps dreaming about it. And for Ned, remembering the Winterfell crypt is a nightmare. It's a fear. It's a thing that like sort of paralyzes him or makes him feel stuck, or he doesn't know what to do. For Arya, it's a way that like it comforts her, and it's like her source of strength and courage, and that's how she's able to go on. So even them having a very similar kind of memory, or at least a memory of the same place, this place that's important to them and their family and their house, they look at it very, very differently.
It's a great catch.
Arya sees it as like this like way to push forward. It holds Ned back. They're interpreting it very differently.
And again, if you look at how they interact with this life and death binary, when Ned thinks of the crypt, he thinks of the dead people who reside there. Mm-hmm. When Arya thinks of the crypt, she thinks of her living brothers and sisters playing there with her as a kid. She's knee deep in that contradiction. And he is very much black and white. You think of a crypt, you think of the dead people.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, winter is coming, death comes for us all.
Right.
Wow, how brutal.
Right.
And she's thinking, no, actually, like you can have life within this place of the dead. So
they coexist.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So let's jump ahead a little bit, because the last point I have to play with here, I just wanted to re-examine something that we've been talking about loosely for a number of weeks now. And some of this, most of this is hypothetical because the show diverges from the books and goes past it. And we see more and more interviews that come out now where it seems like the showrunners just got to pick how things ended. Like there's a limit to how much was informed by any sort of notes from George R. R. Martin. So we take that as apocryphal, right? Most everything after season 4 we can kind of squint at.
Yeah.
But this idea that we found so unsatisfying at the end of the show where Arya kills the Night King. Yes. If you look at the arc that we've been examining in just 4 chapters for this character so far, I feel like that is sort of a fitting finale to her character arc. It's frustrating on Jon's behalf, and I'm more invested in Jon than I am in Arya by the time we get there. But if we just look at Arya, I feel like that is a fitting finale for her, but I don't think it can ever exist in the books. Because Arya, if you look at the way she's being trained here, even with Syrio Forel, she's doing endless kind of sparring matches for single combat. For one-on-one, 2 people have a sword, 1 person emerges. And when she becomes a faceless man, that's all about assassinations, which again is usually one-on-one. She's being trained through most of her arc for single combat. And that makes her killing the Night King in the show, I think that works. That tracks cleanly.
Yeah,
she's trained for single combat, so at the end of the day, she's the one who succeeds in the ultimate
single combat
duel, right, with evil. The problem in the books is that there is no Night King.
Right.
There is
it's too clean even in the show. When there is a Night King, it feels too clean. So and when there's no Night King, it's like that's impossible. You wouldn't have something that clean.
There's no figurehead for the White Walkers. So her being trained for single combat, there is no, like, the call and response is incomplete there. There is no final battle that pays off her entire arc.
Right.
But I wanted to kind of zoom out, because again, this is the problem George R. R. Martin has seemingly, one of the problems I imagine he's been grappling with for the last 11 years writing the next book. I'm sure he's thinking about this. But I wasn't reminded of Arya killing the Night King as much in this chapter as I was reminded of some of the other fantasy stories you and I have been playing with for the past 4 or 5 years. I don't know how long we've been doing this now. I was strongly reminded of Ciri in The Witcher training at Kaer Morhen.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like if you zoom out, this chapter is like an amalgamation of Ciri training at Kaer Morhen and the fall of Sintra.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean.
Which makes, she's much more adept. By the time she's training at Kaer Morhen, she's well on her way to becoming this, like, Witcher apprentice. Versus she's a kid escaping in the fall of Sintra.
Yes, right. And she's just taken away. She doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah. Right. So it would be like putting endgame Ciri and then young Ciri in the same chapter.
Right.
Like, it suggests that Arya at 9 is vastly overpowered compared to where Ciri was during the fall of Cintra in The Witcher.
That's interesting.
And the other thing it reminded me of, as we've more or less killed Ned, taken him off the board, he's imprisoned, he's wounded, he's not an entity anymore, he's not a factor, not a major player. We've kind of, to pivot to Tolkien, we've kind of scattered the Starks.
Mm-hmm.
We've done sort of a breaking of the Fellowship.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And in that kind of scattering, Arya seems to be almost on the Sam and Frodo line.
Yeah.
She's not with everyone else. She's not like the ragtag groups that split off from the initial Tolkien Fellowship.
And she's not even trying to like go rescue somebody else in the Fellowship. She doesn't think of Sansa once in this chapter, by the way.
That's a little damning. But
no, but I'm saying I think it works. Like, she is becoming really solo, because Sam and Frodo, they do think about Merry, Pippin, Aragorn, etc., but their goal is not to go find them the way that Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli's goal is to find Merry and Pippin. Frodo and Sam, their goal is to get the ring to Mordor. Like, they're focusing on like the more like individual. I mean, it's a world changing event. It's not an individual thing, but they're like individually focused in a way that the others aren't. And Arya is kind of doing the same thing here.
Everyone who's not Sam and Frodo, after the breaking of the Fellowship, their job is to just help the war effort, contribute and strengthen up our allies Gondor and Rohan, and just, make friends.
Mm-hmm.
But Sam and Frodo have a direct quest, a goal, and more importantly, a destination.
Yes.
And if you look at the way Arya kind of sketches out her future in this chapter, it is King's Road, Winterfell.
Yes.
So she is on that Sam and Frodo track.
Yeah.
And she's reminding me of Ciri, who is the central anchor point of the Witcher series. So 4 chapters in, I feel like she's being set up for the kind of arc that would pay off in her killing a Night King-like figure and being the linchpin that kind of solves the franchise.
Sure. That's pretty cool. Well, and I think you can kind of extend it, and it complicates itself a bit, because John also has had himself in that Frodo-ish role, both in the context of him and the other brothers and his Night's Watch, especially when you have his best friend is named Sam. But also, if you extend it out, destroying the ring is what saves the world. And John's goal in being at the wall is to protect the world from the Nightwalkers. So it's kind of the same sort of thing. So it's fun that Arya and John get to both exist on this Frodo plane in the same way you can make like John is sort of Geralt and Arya is kind of Ciri. Like, you can have them coexisting in these important, big picture protagonist roles. It's fun.
Are we being too narrative here, though?
Well, no, because again, this is our expectation. First time reading this book, you expect Arya to, now she's going to go on this noble quest and become our main hero.
And save the world.
Right. But then George sort of says, nope, we're not doing that. And instead she's going to get sidetracked 85 times, and she's going to not be able to get to Winterfell, and she's going to finally get there, but her whole family is dead. And then she's going to have to go to Braavos. Like, it's going to be more complicated and messy and less narratively satisfying than that, which again is why Arya killing the Night King doesn't make sense for this world.
These traditional narrative expectations that I think the show did grapple with more and more and less successfully as it went on, because as much as we like subverting those expectations and beheading Ned Stark, at the end of the day, we want a good, satisfying ending, and that usually means good triumphing over evil.
Yeah, you want there to be why did I go through all of this? What's the point of all of this?
Right. But if we take the Night King off the board, because he doesn't exist in the book, and I don't think it's going to be a single sword stroke that ends the White Walkers, we haven't gotten any sort of magic system that suggests it would be that simple. If we take that action or accomplishment off the board, the last thing I can remember Arya doing in the show that is of any sort of grand consequence is her revenge for the Red Wedding.
Yes.
When she impersonates Walder Frey and then nukes the rest of his house. Is that, which is sort of an indirect achievement that's not saving the day, blowing up the Death Star, is that enough of a payoff and a finale for the arc of this character?
No, because you know what I think she should have done next is go kill Cersei. I think she should have made her way down to King's Landing and assassinated Cersei, especially because at that point, Cersei is queen and she's not listening to the people in Winterfell. She's not going to help fight against the White Walkers. And also, personal revenge. Cersei's been on her list of names since day one. So I think, and nobody else succeeds in killing Cersei except for the dumb,
the rocks.
And Jaime wasn't going to do it. So I think I think Arya has to do it.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to give everyone an equal piece of the pie. Because if we, by that point, we're going to have a dozen POV characters that we care about, and we want some sort of satisfying resolution to their 7-book arcs, right? Tyrion's going to need to do something. If I'm going to have someone kill Cersei, I'd rather it be him or Jaime or something more interesting. You know,
I think she'll
pay off the Brienne arc.
Arya could like impersonate Jaime though. That would be fun. You know, she could faceless man Jaime and then kill
let
Cersei.
me pull this to Harry Potter. When we were talking about who gets to kill Bellatrix, who has the best claim to kill Bellatrix Lestrange, Neville is obviously number one there.
Yes.
The fact that Molly Weasley does it's a great like line in the movie.
Sure.
But it's unsatisfying to me because I wanted Neville to be able to do that.
And if not Neville, then Harry. Like, duh. Because
Right.
she kills Sirius and it's a whole thing.
So if we're kind of cleaning up some of these lingering plot threads that will be there at the end of the story, and I have to give Arya a couple of them to tie up in a little bow, I think her avenging her family after narrowly escaping being at the Red Wedding, her then avenging her family and the Red Wedding and taking out the phrase, that does seem like almost enough of a finale here, because she does use the skills that she learns along the way.
Yeah, that's true. I just think it's not big picture enough. Like, I think that is...
But can everyone have a big picture ending?
I think when you've got a central character surviving this long, but I guess, I don't know, because again, that's like what I narratively want.
This is the thing, because Ned dies at the end of the first book, at the end of the first season, which teaches us a lesson that no one is going to reach the satisfying end of their arc. And then we set up his firstborn son, Robb Stark, as this great square-jawed hero, and he's going to avenge his father, and he's going to become the new Lord, and then he gets beheaded too.
Right.
But still, by the time we get to the end of season 8, everyone who's alive, we still want a satisfying end to them, because I remember people asking these questions of, why did we follow Arya for 8 years if she's not going to do something massive at the end?
Yeah,
so
right.
The crushing, inescapable weight of narrative expectations, especially within fantasy, they always rear their ugly heads at the end of every character's plotline. That's why I'm trying to kind of pull back and find some sort of smaller scale satisfaction in her taking out the phrase. Because not all of our surviving characters at the end of book 7 can kill the Night King.
Right.
Even though fantasy rules tell us that would be the most sad. If they all, like the end of every Marvel movie for a couple of years there, like Guardians of the Galaxy, where they all have to hold hands and kill the bad guy through the power of friendship.
Yeah, right.
That's not what's going to happen here.
No.
So we have to find more poetic justice. You know?
I see, yeah. And so you can keep it a little bit more individual. And Arya's goal has never been to save the world. She's never really been concerned with that, because we don't see her have the privilege to be concerned with that. She's on a like daily like survival. Like every day, how am I going to not die? Like, and how am I going to get one step closer to seeing my family again and like saving the rest of the remaining family I have? That's all she cares about. So maybe I think you're right. Yeah, I think killing Walder Frey should have been enough. And she doesn't need to kill the Night King. If anybody's going to kill the Night King, it's going to be Jon. But again, like we're not going to have that anyway. So
because there are beautiful linchpin moments for a lot of these characters. I think Dany turning on King's Landing during the bells, for me, that is the last scene I ever need to see of Dany. I think that is the perfect tragic resolution of her arc.
I agree, yeah.
She doesn't need to hold hands and kill the White Walkers, you know?
Yeah. She shouldn't have been at Winterfell.
Yeah.
She shouldn't have ever gotten there. She should have been like killed by her own dragon or something. She should have died at King's Landing. So as we see more of these characters, because this chapter felt incredibly prophetic. This was sort of a preview of the arc to come over the next 20 years of George writing these books, or almost 30 now. Yeah.
I want to look at this as we continue with some of these POV characters and think in our heads about where they end up in the show, and where, kind of taking it down a notch, where we almost want them to end up in the books, knowing that there will be a gulf between those two endings. I don't know, because this one really made me reflect on that ending. Yeah,
because this is such a big turning point for Arya, and it's like, okay, this is where her story really starts. Like, this is where she goes off on her own path. So yeah, it makes sense that you're zooming out big picture like that. And when this chapter feels so prophetic and ominous for her, then you're really starting to think about what she's destined to do and all that. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What do you think Arya should have done at the end? Please leave a comment below if you're on
Excellent
YouTube.
segue.
Or if you're not, if you're just listening on a podcast, you can send us an email, secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com. Or better yet, you can go to youtube.com and find this video and comment below.
Or comment on the Patreon post.
That's true. If you're on Patreon, you can comment on the post.
What
there.
else will they find on Patreon,
Oh,
Maggie?
they will find our bonus content. We put out, lately, about 2 episodes per month, bonus episodes per month. Sometimes it's 1. Sometimes you get 1 every week when we're doing
Sometimes it's 4.
Fire and Blood, so you never know. But we've got a whole breakfast buffet series, which we're at volume 14 of
This
now.
past Sunday, we just put out the latest installment, which is a sort of trifecta of us talking about difficult, fascinating, challenging movies that we've seen lately. And I loved that discussion. It's the kind of long form stuff that we don't really do on Tuesdays anymore, but we really like to uncork over on Patreon. And that one was talking about The Apprentice, the Ali Abbasi movie. We were talking about Joker, Folie à Deux, and Megalopolis.
Yeah, so those buffets are sort of like just a roundup of us talking about several things at once, and lately they've been sort of thematically linked, and it's been fun. But also on Patreon, we read the entirety of Fire and Blood, the
source material for House of the Dragon.
Thank you. I was like, how do I word this? And that was a lot of fun. We got 12 volumes of that, where we talk a lot about. We also covered all of House of the Dragon seasons 1 and 2, not on Patreon, just on the regular show if you want to check that out. And otherwise, that's what do we got coming out this. What came out this past Tuesday? We just put out
Tristan and I talking about normal people. That was a gauntlet of analysis. I really, really enjoyed that. And we've got a bunch of horror and funky stuff and games, and we've got we have the rest of the year planned.
Yeah, we do.
out.
December is going to be a hoot.
Yes.
Should we reveal it or no? Should we wait?
No, I think we should tease it.
Okay, well, December is going to be a really special theme.
Yes.
The theme is not Christmas.
We like themes.
Sorry to disappoint.
But next week on Friday, we will be back with Sansa chapter 4 or 5.
Yeah, I can't remember.
We'll see
the next Sansa.
what happens to her as the Lannisters kind of maraud through King's Landing, killing all the Starks.
Poor Sansa.
That'll be fun.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
No, that's not how it ends.
Why did I say boo-boo?
We'll see you next time with another
brand new episode. Sorry.
Bye.
Bye.